Hello, and thank you for listening. This is Jordy, and you're listening to Dark Cabin Theories. So these are real claims made by real people. Disclaimer, I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm just here to tell you what was reported. This episode is going to be a deep dive into basically historical cases of apparent possession. Now, for centuries, people across multiple cultures, continents, and different belief systems have described moments where something appeared to take control of a human body. Describing voice changes, different languages, behavioral shifts. People claimed they were no longer themselves. These moments were often given a single explanation, and that explanation was possession. But that word doesn't mean the same thing now as it did back then. So that's where this story really begins. So what do we mean when we say possession? You, the modern audience, hear the word possession. You often picture a very specific image, a body lifting from the ground, a voice that isn't its own, a struggle between good and evil. That image didn't come from history. It actually came from movies. In reality, historical possession accounts were often quieter, longer, and far, far more human. Possession wasn't always violent. Sometimes it was exhaustion. Sometimes it was illness. Sometimes it was fear expressing in the only language people had. So to understand possession, you have to have some understanding. You have to understand the world that described it. For most of human history, there was no framework for mental illness, especially how we understand it today. There was no epilepsy diagnosis, no dissociative disorders, and of course, no trauma-informed psychology. If someone collapsed, convulsed, or spoke incoherently, the explanation wasn't medical, it was spiritual. And importantly, that explanation was shared by everyone. The people afflicted, the witnesses, and the authoritative figures. No one in the room questioned whether possession was real. They only questioned what kind. So this matters more than it sounds. When a society believes something is happening, people behave accordingly. A person's beliefs have power over them. So a person believed to be possessed was expected to resist religious symbols, speak in distress, behave erratically, and improve after ritual interventions. And many actually did those very things, not because demons were expelled, but because beliefs shaped expectation. Expectation shapes your behavior, and behavior shapes memory. Now, historical possession was rarely private. It happened in conventions, in churches, in town squares, and in front of multitude of witnesses. Once an event was labeled possession, it became communal. So people gathered, authorities arrived, and of course, whatever they did to cast out the demons is what they did. whatever belief system they had. And once a narrative formed, it reinforced itself. The afflicted responded to attention. The crowd responds to fear, and the authorities responded to belief. Now, everyone had their part to play in this. Now, the dangers of this is the most unsettling thing about historical possession cases is not that the people believed them, it's that belief made them real in practice. People were imprisoned, exercised repeatedly, starved, and even executed. Not because anyone was lying, but because everyone was certain. Everyone was certain that it was demonic possession. It was this, it was that. They believed solely that it was possession. So this is where you see a pattern emerge. When historians begin reviewing possession cases centuries later, this pattern appeared. These events were clustered, okay? They were around times of famine, during religious conflicts, in highly controlled environments, and more common among young people. Possession did not appear randomly. It appeared where pressure was greatest. So, like I said, during conflicts, around famines, highly controlled environments. Now, this episode is not about proving possession false. It's not about proving it real. First off, it's about understanding why the same behaviors were once interpreted as supernatural and are now interpreted as psychological or neurological. And why, even with explanation, these stories refuse to disappear. Now, I know we were discussing what possession meant in a world without diagnosis. How belief filled the gaps where medicine didn't yet exist. But individual cases only tell part of the story. Because some of the most disturbing possession accounts in history didn't involve one person. Like I said, they were communal affairs. They involved many. And once possession appears to spread, the explanation became harder to keep contained. One of the earliest documented patterns in possession throughout history is something historians later referred to as collective possession. So, entire groups of people, often living together, began displaying similar behaviors: convulsion, vocal outburst, claims of external control. Now, at first glance, these events appear to be easily dismissed. Group hysteria, social contagion, stress in enclosed environments. Those explanations work, at least at the beginning. Many of the most famous cases occurred in covenants. Young women, often isolated from the outside world, living under strict authority. Their days were structured. Their emotions were regulated. Their bodies were not their own. When possession occurred in these environments, it rarely subsided. Witnesses did report in these situations violent spasms, screaming in unison, knowledge of private information, and accusations. And importantly, the behavior followed a script, but no one had written anything that was afflicted. So what script were they following? Why were the possessions so uniform? Why were they in unison? Why did they appear to be multiple victims afflicted by the same entity. In 17th century France, a convent in the town of Loudun became the center of one of the most infamous possession events in history. Multiple nuns claimed to be possessed by demons. They spoke in altered voices. They accused a local priest of sending spirits to corrupt them. These accusations led to his arrest and eventually his execution. From a modern perspective, this case seems fairly clear. Politically motivated, sexual repercussions, and group hysteria, amplified by authorities. But yet, the accounts are uncomfortably detailed. Witnesses described identical manifestations occurring independently. The nuns did not coordinate testimonies in advance, and the behaviors persisted even after public attention lessened. So they continued to behave like this, even after they were out of the public eye. If this was hysteria, it was remarkably consistent. So here's where skeptics start to feel incomplete. Mass hysteria explains emotional contagion. It explains subtle nuances. It explains the escalation. But it does not fully explain the structure. In many of these cases, the possessed did not behave randomly. Like I mentioned before, they followed patterns that appeared before they were taught what possession should look like. They responded to symbols they had not yet been exposed to. They reacted to rituals that they were completely unaware of or what they were. And across different religions, the same behavior appears again and again, and throughout history appeared again and again. One of the most unsettling factors in these cases is how the authorities shaped the outcome. Once possession was declared, the response was immediate. Priests arrived, and whatever rituals for their religion began. The afflicted were no longer treated as sick, but looked at more of like a spiritual battleground. In some cases, the behavior intensified. In others, they would stop entirely. Both outcomes were interpreted as confirmation. If the behavior worsened, the demon resisted. If it stopped, the rituals worked. Either way you look at it, no matter what side of the coin you flipped, beliefs were reinforced, and people believed in possession even more, especially the ones who were there in attendance of these. Imagine seeing this with no other explanation. You would truly believe that this was real. But how do we know it's not? Modern explanations often work backwards. We look at the outcome, then assign a cause. But historical witnesses didn't have that luxury. They were inside the event. And many of them, educated, literate, respected members of society, insisted these experiences were real. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but simply stated that they actually happened and that they were real. And this is respected, educated members of society then. Now, as time progressed, possession reports didn't disappear. They changed locations. So by the 18th and 19th centuries, reports began emerging outside of religion institutions. So they would be more at private homes, hospitals, public spaces. The behavior stayed the same, stayed familiar, stayed consistent. But now, possessions were recorded. Documenting these cases changed everything. Once possession cases entered the modern era, they became harder to ignore. Doctors took notes. Priests recorded their sessions. Witnesses signed statements. And some events were captured on audio and video. They were no longer cases of folklore, imaginary, or are they actually happening or are they not? They existed as documents. Now there's still a lot of skeptics on things that are documented if they actually happened or not. And I'm not talking about just possession. I'm talking about throughout anything that happens through your life. People will always be skeptical of anything that happens. So now, at this point in our story, historians begin noticing something unsettling. Possession accounts from different centuries, different countries, and different belief systems shared core features. Not just identical details, but identical structures. So, loss of control, altered voices, resistant to certain religious objects or stimuli. The explanation for possession changed throughout modern times, but the patterns of possession have not changed. They have stayed consistent since the very beginning of reporting them, especially recording them. Now, it is important to say this clearly. None of this does prove possession is real. Every individual case still has an explanation you could put a label on, whether it's psychological, sociological, or neurological. But we do know this: something is happening here. Something harder to define. Why is every case consistently the same? Could it be because Hollywood has painted possession like this? That's an easy way out. Because imagine the millennia before us of people who were possessed that have never seen The Exorcist. Where did they get their knowledge of this? Spoken word can only transcribe evidence for so long before you end up with the telephone game. Information will change from person to person. How have possessions remained consistent throughout the centuries? Comment down below what you think about this. Now, the biggest question stops being, were these people possessed? And becomes, why do humans across history report the same loss of consciousness, report the same loss of control, report in the same ways under the same conditions? Why is it that they stay consistent while claiming to be possessed? So that question is harder to dismiss with any answer, because it doesn't require beliefs in any religion, in any demons. It requires acknowledging that something about the human mind, and maybe something beyond it, has stayed consistent and hasn't changed. So let's move into the modern era. So cases with audio recording and medical oversight, and people who lived long enough to see their experiences reinterpreted, aka made into movies or documentaries. This is where possession stops being ancient history and starts becoming reality. Now, up to this point, it's been easy to place possession safely in the past, safely in the realm of imagination. A different time, different understanding, a different world. But possession didn't end when medicine advanced. It didn't fade with science. It follows us. And when we entered into the modern world, it brought something new with it. And that being is the ability to record possessions. This is the moment everything changed. The modern era didn't erase possession. It reframed it. Hospitals replaced covenant. Doctors replaced clergy, at least at first. And explanations became clinical. But one thing that didn't change is the behavior. It did not change. What changed was how much of it we documented. So I made a video. The case of Roland Doe. In 1949, a teenage boy, later referred to as Roland Doe, became the subject of one of the most documented possession cases in American history. The details are familiar. Strange noises, scratching sounds, object moving. But what sets this case apart is not the claims. It's the witnesses. You have priests, medical doctors, and hospital staff. People trained to observe, not to believe blindly. Now, I will say this. Catholic and Orthodox priests do not blindly label people possessed. They actually have a rigorous test that they do to everyone that claims to be possessed. They are actually more willing to label something mental illness than possession in the modern era. They will more likely tell you that you're mentally ill than possessed. So, according to written accounts, Roland experienced violent episodes marked by screaming, sudden bouts of just strength, and vocal changes. So priests reported hearing voices that did not sound like a child's voice. Marks allegedly appeared on his body, scratches, and different symbols appeared as well. Witnesses claimed formed without visible cause. They are witnesses that claimed that they watched them appear out of nowhere. Doctors evaluated him. Some believed the behavior was psychological. Others admitted they could not explain everything they observed. Eventually, an exorcism was authorized. Now, the exorcism sessions were not public. They were not theatrical. They were not documented privately. And according to the records, the behavior followed the same pattern. The same responses, the same reaction to certain phrases, the same escalation, then sudden resolve. After the final reported session, the behavior stopped. Not gradually, but abruptly. And Roland went on to live a relatively normal life. Now, I do go in depth in this story if you'd like to check out the video I made on it. So why does this matter, though? It happened in 1949. This wasn't medieval France. This wasn't a covenant. This was post-war America, with modern hospitals, educated observers, and written documentation. And still those involved could not agree on what they witnessed. So that is an important piece of evidence on itself. Because disagreement means uncertainty. And uncertainty is where discomfort begins. If Roland Doe's case feels like a bridge between eras, the next case removes the safety net entirely, because it happened when the world already had a name for mental illness, and then still chose another explanation. We're talking about Anneliese Michel. This happened in 1970. A young woman in Germany began experiencing severe psychological and physical distress. She was diagnosed with epilepsy. She received treatment, but her condition worsened. She began exhibiting behavioral changes. Her family described as unrecognizable. It wasn't her. They don't know who she was. She was repulsed by religious objects. She did self-harm and she had altered speech. Her parents believed she was possessed. Doctors disagreed at first. What makes Anneliese Michel's case impossible to ignore are the recordings, the audio tapes, hours of them, captured during the exorcism sessions. Anyone can listen to them. You don't need to believe to hear the changes in her voice. You don't need faith to hear the distress. And you don't need religion to feel uncomfortable. After she died of malnourishment and exhaustion, her case became a legal matter. Doctors, priests, they all testified. Psychologists analyzed every details. And the consensus, her death was preventable. But the interpretation of her behavior remained divided. They still argued. No matter what happened, they could not come to the same conclusion. Some argued untreatable mental illness. Others argued belief reinforced harm. And some quietly admitted that parts of the case do not align neatly with diagnosis. And of course, you have the people who believe that she was 100% possessed. So Anneliese reportedly displayed knowledge she knew nothing about. She reacted to stimuli before they were introduced. She used languages inconsistent with her education. So speaking in different languages, you could say she was speaking in dead languages like Latin. Now, I'm not going to state that as a fact because I only read that in one place, but that could be true. Comment down below what languages you guys found that she spoke, because it only says she used languages she didn't know, and I only found one source that said Latin. So these details don't prove possession, but they don't completely dismiss it either. And that is the very problem. So by this point, we have modern medicine, psychiatric frameworks, neurological understanding, and still cases that resist clean resolution. The explanations are strong, they are reasonable, they are often correct, but they don't close the door. They leave it cracked. Now notice something important. As we move forward in time, fewer people use the word demon. Instead, they say, I wasn't myself, something took over, I was watching it happen. The language changes, but the experience does not. Across centuries, cultures, and diagnoses, one feature remained consistent: loss of control. Not metaphorical, not emotional, but literally, people stating that they lose control. People describe being present while something else acts. trapped in their own mind. That detail appears to be often ignored. Now, at this point, reduction begins to feel unsatisfying. Labeling these events as just mental illness removes their meaning, but not their pattern. Calling them cultural artifacts ignores their persistence, and this dismisses them outright, ignoring testimony from people who had no incentive to lie, who were there whenever 500 years later the people studying it were not. This is where belief starts to shift, not towards certainty, but away from dismissing the whole thing. Because when explanations multiply instead of resolve, the mystery does deepen. Now, what caused these events? No, let's actually ask the question, what if possession isn't what we thought it was? And never was? This is where interpretation changes. And once it does, it cannot change back. Time, history, diagnosis. We've explained possession as belief, fear, illness, and even misunderstanding. And none of those explanations are coherently wrong. But they're not coherently right either. They are beginning to feel incomplete. But something strange happens when you line these cases up side by side. The further apart they are in time, the more similar they become. Modern explanations promise closure. If we can label something, we believe we've contained it. So epilepsy, dissociative disorders, mass hysteria, each explains a piece and then they stick it to it. But none explain the whole. And the longer these cases are studied, the more people are quiet to admit the same thing. The behavior stops, but the patterns consist. So everything about the world changes. Medical advances, psychological maturity, and religion loses authority. But possession doesn't disappear. It actually adapted to modern society. The language softened, the setting moved, the symptoms became less theatrical, but the core experience remains the same. People still to this day report a loss of control, an inner eye observing their actions while they are not in control of their body, a sense of being basically overridden, and then a return to normal that feels sudden and foreign. That last part matters. Now, I've watched consistently a Catholic priest who does podcasts about possessions, Father Carlos Martins. In every single one of his possession cases, they all follow this exact pattern. Now, if possession was purely cultural, it should look different in every timeline. But it doesn't. Across centuries, people describe these same exact things. And perhaps the most unsettling, a reluctance to talk about it, not because they fear disbelief, but because they fear remembering. One of the strongest arguments against possession is belief itself. If people are taught to expect possession, they may enact it. That makes sense. But here's the problem. Possession reports didn't stop when belief faded. They just stopped being called possession. Now they're called dissociative episodes or psychotic breaks. Different names, but the same loss of control. At some point, the question shifts not, was this demonic? But what does it mean that humans across history describe the same internal loss of control, the same internal I? Why does the experience feel external? Why does it feel intrusive? And why does it feel like someone else? Psychology can describe this, but it struggles to explain the sensation. This is where the historical records get quiet, because many doctors, priests, and researchers didn't publish their private thoughts. But they did send letters and they did write journals. And in them, you start to see something shift. Not belief, but hesitation. Phrases like, I cannot explain this detailed. The behavior stopped without clear cause. The patient insisted it was not them. Those are consistent throughout every case. At a certain point, reduction stops feeling scientific. It starts feeling defensive. But if every unexplained experience must be forced into an existing framework, we do stop learning. Possession doesn't need to be supernatural to be real. It only needs to be represented by something we fully don't understand. And history suggests we've been wrong before, quite often. So perhaps the most haunting detail of possession cases is what happens after. People don't become Christians. They don't become whatever religion freed them from the possession. They don't seek attention. Most retreat. They avoid the topic. They describe the experience as something they don't want to revisit. That's not how fabricated stories behave. That's how trauma behaves. So at the beginning of this episode, disbelief felt safe. It felt responsible. It felt modern. Now it just feels incomplete. Not because possession has been proven, but because something about it refuses to disappear. No matter how often we rename it, we will never find a solution to it. We'll never know truly what possession is. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video. Comment down below what you guys think. Is possession demonic? Is it all in the person's mind? Or is there something deep-rooted in us that keeps possession cases consistent throughout all of history? Are there possession cases that do not fit this narrative, that were not disproven, that are still left up to mystery? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to check out the possession on Rolando. And as well, I will be making a video about Annalise Michel and posting it in the future. Thank you for listening. Take care.